gentlemen and ladies of the Senate.
One chapter receiving fresh scrutiny comes from his earliest years in the Senate, when he strongly opposed mandatory school busing. It was designed to achieve integration and a more equitable education. It was the mid-1970s. Biden favored desegregation, but not through busing. What's less known is how he followed the lead of some of the Senate's most fervent segregationists. In a series of never-before-published letters reviewed by CNN, the strength of Biden's opposition to busing comes into sharper focus. On March 25, 1977, Biden wrote, "My bill strikes at the heart of the injustice of court-ordered busing. It prohibits the federal courts from disrupting our educational system." Biden sought and received support from Mississippi Senator James Eastland, the Democratic chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and a leading symbol of Southern resistance to desegregation. He frequently spoke of blacks as, quote, an inferior race. Biden reflected on that era earlier this year.
They're a bunch of racists. There was, James O. East of Mississippi, Strom Thurmond, and so on. There were 9 guys who were in the caucus that were, I ran against in the civil rights movement.
But he did not say that Eastland and others were partners on several of Biden's anti-busing bills. On June 30th, 1977, Biden wrote, "Dear Mr. Chairman, I want you to know that I very much appreciate your help during this week's committee meeting in attempting to bring my anti-busing legislation to a vote." Then in 1978, Biden again asked Eastland to put his anti-busing bill before the full Senate, writing, "Your participation in floor debate would be welcome."
Democratic presidential candidate Joseph Biden today faces a controversy. 3 weeks ago at a debate at the Iowa State Fair, he used phrases identical to those delivered by British Labour Party leader Neil Kinnock.
And I started thinking as I was coming over here, why is it that Joe Biden is the first in his family ever to go to a university?
Why am I the first Kinnock in 1,000 generations to be able to get to university?
Why is it that my wife, who's sitting out there in the audience, is the first in her family to ever go to college?
Why is Glenys the first woman in her family in 1,000 generations to be able to get to university?
No, it's not because they weren't as smart. It's not because they didn't work as hard. It's because they didn't have a platform upon which to stand.
Does anybody really think that they didn't get what we had because they didn't have the talent or the strength or the endurance or the commitment? Of course not. It was because there was no platform upon which they could stand.
The next president of the United States, Joe Biden.
It's June 9th, 1987, and then Senator Joseph R. Biden Jr. has just entered the presidential race. For those who may have forgotten or weren't around in '87, here's what happened. Biden started off as a strong contender.
Senator Joseph R. Biden Jr. of Delaware.
But his campaign was marred by some early blunders, like this one.
What law school did you attend, and where did you place in that class? And the other question is...
I think I probably have a much higher IQ than you do, I suspect.
And he exaggerated his academic record in law school.
Went back to law school, and in fact ended up in the top half of my class.
And then there were moments like this, repeated later during the campaign.
When I marched in the civil rights movement, I marched with tens of thousands of others to change attitudes.
But he never actually marched in the civil rights movement at all. Ultimately, it was accusations of plagiarism in his speeches.
I did not know that was a Robert Kennedy quote. My mistake.
That forced him to drop out of the race.
I made some mistakes.
But this standard is not a measure of how we can evaluate the condition of our society. It cannot measure the health of our children, the quality of our education, the joy of their play.
Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play.
He has also quoted or paraphrased John Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey, and British Labour Party leader Neil Kinnock, all without credit.
Joseph Biden admitted today that he committed plagiarism when he was in law school. He said it was a mistake, but that it was unintentional.
He quoted 5 pages of someone else's work without proper citation.
I've done some dumb things, and I'll do dumb things again.
He was given an F.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I've been dumb.
To the political community in Washington, it all seems of a piece. Plagiarism at law school, plagiarism on the stump.
The great communicator. Strike that. The great imitator.
You don't steal verbatim.
or when you do, as he did 99% of the time, you give credit.
Biden's critics say he sells himself as a man whose words and visions can inspire a new generation in politics. But if the thoughts, phrases, and visions really belong to others, it's a form of false advertising.
Is it a wise idea, though, to take something that personal, anyway, from another politician and try and appropriate it to your own campaign?
I think it was a stupid thing to appropriate material that was really very personal, that was someone else's.
Most people didn't know who he was, you know, Joe Biden, and now they're going to say, oh yeah, he's the guy who plagiarized. That's
a lot of people.
Politically, that's devastating.
These clips are devastating. He looks like a Joe Biden wind-up doll with somebody else's words coming out.
If they're going to do things that are stupid as well as immoral, then they're probably too dumb to have the job of president.
Voters are going to have to decide whether he was dishonest or dumb.
Senator Joseph Biden may have more explaining to do.
The new questions stem from taped remarks of Biden during an April campaign appearance in New Hampshire.
I went to law school on a full academic scholarship, the only one in my class to have a full academic scholarship. Went back to law school and in fact ended up in the top half of my class. I was the outstanding student in the political science department at the end of my year. I graduated with 3 degrees from undergraduate school and 165 credits, only needed 123 credits.
Biden now concedes he did not graduate in the top half of his law school class, that he does not have 3 degrees from college, and that he was not named outstanding political science student in college.
Newsweek says Biden actually went to school on a half scholarship, ended up near the bottom of his class, and won only 1 degree, not 3.
Joe Biden ranked 76th in a class of 85 at the University of Syracuse Law School. I mean, this guy comes off this whole thing as a flyweight.
Now Biden says Newsweek is right. His memory had failed him.
Joe Biden was victimized by the truth.
Bye-bye Biden. He may not know it yet, but I think this is going to be very difficult for him to recover.
Is Joe Biden dead meat, yes or no?
I think so.
Bob?
It's in terminal condition.
Terminal? Eleanor?
Yes, unless he comes in third in Iowa.
Morton?
Dying.
I say dead.
And parts of his political history continue to haunt him, like his role in the questioning of Anita Hill in 1991.
It is appropriate to ask Professor Hill anything any member wishes to ask her to plumb the depths of her credibility.
The senator made a very moving and eloquent speech as a son of the Confederacy, acknowledging that it was time to change and yield to a position that Senator Carol Moseley Braun raised on the floor of the Senate, not granting a federal charter to a organization made up of many fine people who continue to display the Confederate flag.
I have a fairly, well, I won't say fairly, I have a very strong view relating to the matter to which you spoke last, and that is the hiring of undocumented workers by you and your husband. When we first met on January the 5th, following your being named by President-elect Clinton to be Attorney General, you volunteered this fact to me. You volunteered the circumstances under which this hiring took place, and you volunteered that what did take place was a violation of the United States immigration law. I've spoken to you at length about this matter, and you've been interviewed by the FBI and by the committee investigative staff under oath. And this matter is, as you know, a serious one in my view. The committee and the public, as we've discussed, has to be assured that you are, without exception, going to be willing to enforce the law. And the immigration law falls under your responsibility. It happens on your watch as Attorney General. And I believe it's important you have an opportunity to explain in even greater detail than you have in your opening statement the various circumstances surrounding this hiring. Now, let me begin my questioning, if I may, on this matter, and then when my second round is up, we'll get back to those matters that have not been touched upon, and I expect everything will have been related to the substantive operation of the department. When did you first hire the unauthorized workers?
And because of a corrupt system that exists in Mexico, there is the 1% of the population at the top, a very small middle class, and the rest is abject poverty. Folks, I voted for a fence. I voted, unlike most Democrats, and some of you won't like it, I voted for 700-mile fence. But let me tell you, we can build a fence 40 stories high, unless you change the dynamic in Mexico. And you will not like this, and punish American employers who knowingly violate the law when in fact they hire illegals. Unless you do those two things, all the rest is window dressing.
So I hope this crime bill, when it passes, the Biden-Hatch crime bill, as it becomes law, God willing, I hope that we will have ended once and for all this notion that is a hangover from the 60s, that somehow Democrats are weak on crime and Democratic presidents are weak on crime and Republicans are tough on crime. The truth is, every major crime bill since 1976 that's come out of this Congress, every minor crime bill has had the name of the Democratic senator from the state of Delaware, Joe Biden, on that bill, and has had a majority vote of the Democratic members of the United States Senate on the bill. So one of the things I want to do in addition to end the crime is end the political carnage that goes on when we talk about crime. Crime is not Democrat or Republican. Making the streets safe is not a Democratic or Republican issue. This is one of those issues I hope this passage of this bill will be taken out of the gridlock category and moved into an emerging consensus. And the consensus is as follows, and I will cease when I finish this statement. The consensus is, A, we must take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street. Unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing, because they literally, I yield myself 3 more minutes, because they literally have not been socialized. They literally have not had an opportunity. We should focus on them now, not out of a liberal instinct for love, brother, and humanity, although I think that's a good instinct, but for simple, pragmatic reasons. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets that society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. Again, it does not mean because we created them that we somehow forgive them or do not take them out of society to protect my family and yours from them. They are beyond the pale, many of those people. Beyond the pale. And it's a sad commentary on society. We have no choice but to take them out of society. And the truth is, we don't very well know how to rehabilitate them at that point. That's the sad truth. You're looking at the fellow who was one of the primary architects of the Sentencing Commission. You know what the basic premise of the Sentencing Commission is? I know the presiding officer knows. It was the first time in 80 years we rejected the notion that the condition of sentencing must be related to how long it would take to rehabilitate. I'm the guy that said rehabilitation, when it occurs, we don't understand it and notice it, and even when we notice it and we know it occurs, we don't know why. So you cannot make rehabilitation a condition for release. That's why in our system, the federal system, you serve 85% of your time. I remember when it was going on, when I was making these arguments in the late 70s, they used to call it Biden's same time for the same crime provision. It's a shame, but we don't know how to rehabilitate. But there is a consensus, and I will cease. A, we must make the streets safer. I don't care why someone is a malfactor in society. I don't care why someone is antisocial. I don't care why they become a sociopath. We have an obligation to cordon them off from the rest of society, try to help them, try to change their behavior. That's why we do in this bill. We have drug treatment and we have other treatments to try to deal with it. But they are in jail, away from my mother, your husband, our families. But we would be absolutely stupid as a society if we didn't recognize the condition that nurtured those folks still exist.
Number one, Roe v. Wade's the law of the land. A woman has a right to choose that decision. And if this court were to overrule Roe v. Wade and I was president, I would make it legislatively I would push to make it legislatively.
That is former Vice President Joe Biden in New Hampshire yesterday. And joining us now, NBC News correspondent Heidi Prisbilla. Her latest reporting examines the evolution of Biden's views on abortion rights. And Heidi, you say it is, quote, more striking than previously recognized. Walk us through it.
Correct, Willie. According to this NBC review of Biden's voting record going back to the late 1970s, early 80s, his record is far more conservative than previously understood. We all know, Willie, that Biden is a devout Catholic, always has been. He's long been personally opposed to abortion. But in this case, at the time that the Hyde Amendment was conceived, there was a raging debate over what the exceptions should be for federally funded abortion. And in this case, Joe Biden specifically aligned himself with more conservative Republicans and Democrats in opposing any exceptions for rape and incest. So just to be clear, we're talking about medicated funding abortion for poor women here. These were votes that were taken in the late 80s, or in the late 70s, early 80s. And Joe Biden in this case did align with conservatives like Jesse Helms, with conservatives like Robert Byrd from West Virginia, whereas some of the other more liberal Northeastern Catholics like Ted Kennedy, like Pat Moynihan, did support those exceptions. The second thing that we discovered exclusively, Willie, is that in the current context of the 2020 debate, Biden does stand alone in continuing to support that Hyde Amendment, which bans federal funding for abortion with some rare exceptions, including the life of the mother, including rape and incest.
And Heidi, you got your hands on a 1994 letter that Joe Biden wrote, then Senator Biden, to constituents, where he pointed out that on no fewer than 50 occasions he'd voted against federal funding for abortions. The quote inside the April 7th, 1994 letter reads, "Those of us who are opposed to abortions should not be compelled to pay for them." We'll see how that plays in the Democratic primary.
When I introduced the budget freeze years ago, the liberals in my party said, "It's an awful thing you're doing, Joe. You are all the programs we care about. You're freezing them. Money for the blind, the disabled, education, and so on." And my argument then is one I make now, which is the strongest, most compelling reason to be for this amendment or an amendment. And that is that if we don't do that, all the things I care most about are going to be gone. I mean, whatever happened to that old conservative discipline about paying for what you spend? I'm up for re-election this year, and I'm going to remind everybody what I did at home, which is going to cost me politically. When I argued that we should freeze federal spending, I meant Social Security as well. I meant Medicare and Medicaid. I meant veterans benefits. I meant every single solitary thing in the government. And I not only tried it once, I tried it twice, I tried it a third time, and I tried it a fourth time.
The president used his radio address yesterday and tomorrow in the Rose Garden to talk about a constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage.
I can't believe the American people can't see through this. We already have a law, the Defense of Marriage Act, where we've all voted, not where I voted and others said, look, marriage is between a man and a woman, and states must respect that. Nobody's violated that law. There's been no challenge to that law. Why do we need a constitutional amendment? Marriage is between a man and a woman. What's the game going on here?
Do you support gay marriage?
No, Barack Obama nor I support redefining from a civil side what constitutes marriage. We do not support that. The vast majority of America is not homophobic. They just never knew they knew anybody who was gay. And when people realize they're people they know, they're brothers, they're sisters, they're cousins. You know, I remember my dad, God love him. It was 1961, and I was applying for a job as a lifeguard in the city pool system because they paid better than the county job I had. And he dropped me off at the town square, Rodney Square, and there were two men in suits like I'm wearing standing in a corner. The light was red, and they kissed as I was getting out of the car, and I looked back at my dad. Like I hadn't seen that before, and he said, "It's simple, Joe. They love each other." Look, let me be clear also. I'm not banning fracking in Pennsylvania or anywhere else. And I'm going to protect Pennsylvania jobs, period. No more, no new fracking. We are going to get rid of fossil fuels.
Well, like what about, say, stopping fracking and stopping new pipe?
Would there be any place for fossil fuels, including coal and fracking, in a Biden administration?
No, we would work it out. We would make sure it's eliminated. I guarantee you, we're going to end fossil fuel, and I am not going to cooperate. No ability for the oil industry to continue to drill, period. Ends. Number one.
3 consecutive American presidents have enjoyed stints of explosive economic growth due to a boom in oil and natural gas production. As president, would you be willing to sacrifice some of that growth, even knowing potentially that it could displace thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of blue-collar workers in the interest of transitioning to that greener economy?
The answer is yes. The answer is yes. No more, no new fracking.
Sure. So first of all, I will repeat, and the American people know, that Joe Biden will not ban fracking. That is a fact.
I am not banning fracking. Let me say that again. I am not banning fracking. Despite all I've heard, I quite frankly think that both the arguments for and against NAFTA are vastly, vastly, vastly overblown. As I look at this issue, and I do not pretend to be an expert on international trade matters, I see it in the end that 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now, we're going to look down at this issue, and in terms of the context in which it's being debated about creating jobs or losing jobs, this is essentially going to be a wash.
Joe Biden's trade deals with China cost Wisconsin nearly 89,000 jobs. But it doesn't stop there. Listen.
I'm supporting NAFTA because I think it is a positive thing to do.
NAFTA shipped our jobs to Mexico, closed our factories.
Judy, you're talking to somebody who, unlike some of my colleagues here, voted against NAFTA, voted against PNCR with China, 2 agreements that cost us over 4 million decent-paying jobs.
Let me ask you about China, because in 2011, when you were vice president, you said, quote, "It is in our self-interest that China continue to prosper." A lot of people think that allowing China into the World Trade Organization, which you supported, extending most favored nation status to China, which you supported, that those steps allowed China to take advantage of the United States by using our own open trade deals against us.
No.
Do you think in retrospect that you were naive about China?
No. Here's the thing. In the context of that, we want China to grow. We don't want to have a war with China. I said to Xi Jinping when you may remember, the president wanted me to spend time with him as vice president. He was going to be president, and he couldn't do it. So I traveled around the world with him. He said, "Why do you keep saying you're Pacific power?" I said, "Because we are. We are Pacific power. And if we weren't, you would not have been able to have any stability at all. It's in our interest that China be stable." I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko. They would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. I said, "I'm telling you, you're not getting $1 billion. I said, "You're not getting $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here." And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, "I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money." Oh, son of a got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.